I think one of the issues we have is we're convincing ourselves that we're going to avoid problems that we may never actually encounter. And that stops us from growing to the place where we'd be sustainable or we might be happy or fulfilled with the results that we have. Podcast Growth Nation. Today, for episode number 156, we're going to do a little bit of a freestyle episode. So I titled it The Latest Lessons I've Learned. I feel like that's probably the best title because I don't know exactly what I'm going to talk about. I just kind of want to do a state of the podcasting, state of the coaching type episode. So it's going to be a little bit different. I was on with a client yesterday. Shout out to you if you're listening. Philip. Shout out to Philip. And we were talking about how he has built a pretty large podcast. And Philip is the type of person who just does a ton of research, and I can take very little credit for any of his success. He's just a grinder, does a lot of research, is always looking for tips and tricks and strategies. So shout out to Philip. And he's grown a pretty successful podcast and a fairly successful coaching practice, whether it's one-on-one coaching, a group model, Facebook group. And he said, I don't know if I want to do the one-on-one type of stuff anymore where I'm just trading my time for money. And I said, fair. Okay, let's go through it. We had an entire call where we talked about this. Here's the truth of the matter. Very few people ever have to worry about that. So many people talk about scaling way too early. Now, at this point, I think coming up on 500 episodes in, which Philip is, now is a good, we can talk about that. It's not scalable and it's not what you want to do and it's not the direction you want to move in. But do you know how many people I've worked with who have said to me, well, I don't want to coach, I don't want to trade my time for money, or it's not scalable, or whatever it is. You don't have to worry about that for a while. You don't have to worry about that for a decent amount of time, especially if you're just starting out. What if you avoiding that thing is also stopping you from getting to know your community at a deeper level, from understanding your audience's pain points, practicing coaching, if that's something you do want to do at any point, practicing speaking, warming up your audience to the point where maybe they'll join a Facebook group after. I just feel like there's so many missed opportunities when people say, well, that's not scalable. Well, it's not scalable. How do you scale that? That's a problem that you can solve when you get there. Most people don't really ever worry, or most people don't ever really get there. That's like a restaurant that has 100 seats saying, well, what happens if we get 200 people? Let's get 100 first. And then we'll figure it out. Well, if we find a way to get 100 people to fill the restaurant, maybe we make enough money where we can get an addition built or we get a second location or whatever it is. That's something so common that I've seen that I think stops us. It holds us back. A lot of the stuff that we did in the beginning wasn't scalable. And then eventually it got to the place where we had revenue and then we could hire someone to do it. And now it's scalable. But in the beginning, it wasn't scalable for me to do all the audio and video editing. It wasn't scalable for forever, but that built systems and it built awareness and it built opportunity. And in the beginning, that's how we were able to start growing the monetization in a different avenue. But that never would have happened if I just said, well, not going to do that. It's not scalable. So I just don't want anybody to fall into that trap because you're missing out on opportunity for sure. If you say, well, it's not scalable. I'm not going to do it because it's not scalable. So that's something super common I'm seeing lately. Another thing, okay, this is always a hard thing. This is always a fine line. I don't want to sound like a terrible person when I say this. A lot of people and a lot of shows I'm going on are creating posts and they want me to collaborate and share those posts on my social media. Unfortunately, it's just a still frame picture of me, or it's an audiogram, or the entire clip chosen is of the host either asking a question or talking about something else. I can't share those. It's not going to do anything because it's not a great piece of content. And while I post some pretty low quality stuff in terms of I'll just post a picture of me at the gym or whatever it is, if it's an appearance of me, I want to make it as good as possible. Now, I share everything in my story. I'm happy to share everything in my story. But a feed post just requires a higher quality piece of property if we're thinking it from like a real estate perspective. So one of the reasons your podcast might not be growing is because you're not creating post-production high enough quality that people aren't going to share. That I love the collaboration post. I love the fact that you took the time to do. I love that. And I can't guarantee that I'm going to be able to share everything, because if it's just a still frame picture, it doesn't add any value. And if it doesn't add any value, it's most likely not going to create any level of conversion. So now is the easiest time ever to create video content. Opus Clip, Riverside has clips, StreamYard has clips, a lot of different places have clips. Are they great? No, they're not great. But maybe it's a good way to dip your toe into it. And then make sure you're choosing one that highlights the guest. Now, again, I'm very low maintenance when it comes to this, super low maintenance, because I'm so used to seeing myself on camera, so I don't have to be having a good hair day. I don't have to be wearing the right thing. I don't care about that. But it does have to be something that would make sense from a value perspective. So that's a whole nother thing I'm seeing is, again, it doesn't matter how good the interview is if we can't get people to the interview. And that is the marketing. That is the marketing that we're trying to grow and learn more about. And that's what we're trying to optimize for. So that's another thing. The other thing that I'm really, really, really seeing is people tend to go with what is the most comfortable. So if they're comfortable with guest episodes, they stay with guest episodes. If they're comfortable with solo episodes, they stay with solo episodes. One of the best things about having a podcast is it allows you to expand your skill sets. And obviously, I come from a self-improvement, personal development background. So anything that you can do in your podcast that will also help you grow is not only good for long-term, but it's really good for you to build a short-term skill set. And I don't think that's ever a bad thing. So that's another perspective, is how can the podcast help you grow in ways outside of maybe how it's helping your audience grow? That's something. Another thing I'm seeing, and this is coming from some very successful YouTubers and some very successful YouTube channels, what they're doing and what they're focused on is creating free PDFs that get an email and then really focusing on growing your email list. Now, that is something we have not focused on at all. We've been told to do it. It hasn't been a priority. We're definitely operating our business in a different way. But I do think from the call to action perspective, a Facebook group is not a giant ask, but I mean, okay, let's think of it this way. When we get to the end of today's episode, what are you more likely to do? Are you more likely to join the Facebook group? Or are you more likely to enter your email and your name to get a free PDF on 5 questions I would ask every guest? It depends, right? It depends on you. It depends on what you value your email at. It depends on a lot of things. But that is the way that a lot of people are going, and that's probably something we'll be testing. Do with that information what you please. Do with that information what you think is most valuable, most optimal, most sustainable. I know creating PDFs can take time, and then where do you host it? There's a lot of different options for that, but I do know it can be a little bit of a higher barrier to entry for some of us as opposed to others. Another thing I'm seeing is people focused on monetizing at the cost of their growth and potentially the relationship with their audience. So I had a call with a podcaster yesterday, a client yesterday. He's not just a podcaster, he's a client. And he said, hey, I'm thinking of jumping over to a new podcast hosting platform that will pay me for sponsorship. And I said, okay, let's look at it. And the platform is Spreaker. It's a pretty common one, pretty popular one. And he said the upside, the thing that I'm really interested in is the fact that you don't have to have any specific audience size, and they'll pay you for ads and sponsorships. And I said, okay, what are they paying? And he said, I don't know, I'm not sure. Okay. The research that I came up with says if you're under 5,000 listens per month, they're paying you anywhere from $1.60 per 1,000 listens to like $6 per 1,000 listens. So if you have 1,000 listens per month, you're making anywhere from $1.80 to $6. Is that worth it to you? That's up to you. Now, here's the wonky thing. The way they measure it is not necessarily listens, it's impressions. So let's say you have 10 ads on one episode, they might be able to quantify that as higher. Now, is it going to be, I'm getting 1,000 listens, but I have 10 ads, so I'm getting 10,000 impressions? I don't know exactly the algorithm that they have for that. But even if you were to do that, it still would be like, maybe it would be like $60 a month or something like that. It depends on what's worth it to you. I think if you have to have 10 ads in your podcast, you're probably breaking rapport with your audience. It's too much. There's too much ads. But then again, YouTube, there's a lot of ads on YouTube. I pay for YouTube Premium, so I'm not sure how many there actually are anymore. But we have clients that run ads, and there's 8 ads in a 30-minute episode. So that's a lot too. But I just think, I don't know, maybe that's becoming a new normal on podcasts and people are willing to sit through them. I'm not. If I was listening to a podcast, and again, this is my personal opinion. If I was listening to a podcast today that had no ads, and then tomorrow it had 8 ads, I would probably stop listening to that podcast. Do I have ads in this podcast? I have 1 or 2 calls to action at the end. Yes. Will there ever be an ad in the middle of this podcast from somebody else? No, never. I don't think it's worth it. I don't think the loss in relationship with you is worth however much money I would make. I just don't think it's worth it. Now, when you get to like 1 million listens a month, does it matter if some of your people don't like it? No, not nearly as much. But if you had ads the whole time, would you ever get to 1 million a month? I don't know. So there's the opportunity cost versus how much you're actually getting paid from the opportunity. It's hard for me to justify making $10 a month and maybe losing credibility or relationship with your audience. So that's kind of the long-term, short-term perspective. I always want you to do what's best for you, but the next thing I want is what's best for your audience. And that might be ad-free. So that's something. Now, again, this is why only certain people succeed, because that model is not going to create survival for most people. It's not. If you're getting 1,000 listens per month, and let's say you can turn that into $50 a month, that's not going to necessarily allow you to delegate. It's not necessarily going to allow you to pay for ads. It's not going to necessarily allow you to pay for a nicer camera. It's not necessarily going to move the needle on reinvestment. If you're just doing this for a hobby and you're thinking, yeah, it'd be cool, $50 a month, that'd be cool. Love that for you. Awesome. If you're trying to do this full time, I do not think that should almost ever be your main focus for monetization. I think there's too many things that can go wrong. You're not really in control. Somebody else is dictating how much they want to pay. If something behind the scenes changes, this happened on YouTube where there were certain channels that were getting, so there were certain kids channels that were making like $100,000 a month just from ads. YouTube did something on the back end. We have to make sure that the kid-friendly content is actually kid-friendly and has to have a new label, boom, boom, boom. People took like a 50% pay cut just from ads.
I just wanted to take a quick second and give a shout out and a huge thank you to Next Level Podcasting Solutions, Kevin and his team. They have been incredible to work with, very flexible, on the spot with any questions that I have or any concerns that I have. When I first started out my podcast, I was doing everything on my own. I have no editing background. I have no podcasting background. I knew nothing about it. And so I was bootstrapping all of this myself while I was still trying to take on my role as a full-time mom. And once I met up with Kevin and we had these discussions and I got on board with adding an editing team, Oh my goodness. It just lifted this weight off of me. It lifted my time that I was spending doing my editing. And in the beginning, full transparency, when I was editing just my individual recordings, it was a little more manageable, not super manageable. And then when I started doing my interviews for the podcast, it was hours upon hours of me doing the editing that didn't include any of the promotional material that I am now getting from Kevin and his team. It wouldn't have been sustainable. I would not have been able to keep up with that. So I recommend Kevin and his team. They have done wonderful work in helping me grow my podcast. I have really enjoyed working with the editing team, and it definitely feels like more of a team environment versus me hiring them to do a specific job. I mean, we all work collaboratively on the projects that I have, and I have these crazy ideas sometimes, and they come up with a solution to fit my needs. I can't recommend them enough. I really enjoyed working with them. Kevin and the Next Level Podcasting Solutions, thank you so much for the work that you have done in the past and are continuing to do for me. I'm growing this community and growing this platform with a beautiful team that is working for me and with me to see my vision and help that come to life. So thank you again so much. I really appreciate you guys.
So they went from making, let's say $100,000 a month to $50,000 a month. Now, again, still a good amount of money. I think they'll be just fine. But if you were making $5,000 a month and that went down to $1,000 a month, that's different. If you were just starting to do it and you were making $1,000 a month and that goes down to $100 a month, things just got worse quickly. I just want to make sure that you're in full control as much as possible. And so much of what I talk about on here is based on that. One of the reasons I think everybody should be able to do solo episodes is if a guest doesn't show up, you have an opportunity to do a solo episode and you still get to put that value out and you don't miss and you get consistency. At some point, you're probably going to want to go on other podcasts. You doing solo episodes allows you to practice speaking. It allows you to get familiar in front of the camera by yourself. It allows you to review episodes that are just of you and see what your filler words are, what your railings are, that type of stuff. I think that's super beneficial. So it's not just about being a successful podcaster. I think the goal is to be a well-rounded podcaster who can do a little bit of everything. Somebody can throw a camera in your face and say, hey, give me a 1-minute testimonial. Boom, off to the races. Got that. Somebody can say, hey, I'd love for you to MC an event. Cool, got that. I got the solo experience. I can talk to the audience. Cool, let me bring the energy. And I think that's what builds confidence. And then when you do that long enough, opportunities open up, and then you can say yes to those opportunities. You've heard me say this before. The podcast is what's going to create the opportunities for you to monetize more than the podcast is going to be what gets monetized. In most cases. It just is that way. That's just the way it works for most podcasters. Because it requires, if you have to have a top 1% podcast, not on listen notes, in the real world, top 1% success, quote unquote, to get some level of sustainable ad revenue, that means 99% of us are going to fail. Right off the bat. That's just the way the numbers work. But what if 75% of podcasts could actually make money if they went in different avenues? That means 75% of people could be successful as opposed to 1% in that way. And that's why I'm so big on coaching, product, services, building it into a business. I'm so big on that because it gives you more control. And out of all of the podcasts I've worked with, very few have ever gotten to the place where they actually will make meaningful money from ads. Client I was on with yesterday, 30,000 listens a month. Awesome. He said, I'm thinking of maybe going in a sponsorship direction. What do you think? I said, you probably will get paid anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000 a month just for ads. Awesome. Love it. Great. Because they don't necessarily want to go in the direction that they thought. Love it. And they're not hyper-focused on it replacing their income. That's another piece of it. I was on a podcast breakthrough session with someone who said, yeah, I actually got reached out to by a company, and they said they were willing to offer me $1,400 a month for a mid-roll ad on every episode. And I said, did you take it? And he said, no, I didn't take it. I said, all right, let's book another call. Totally free. I want to help you. Let's craft a message. Let's reach out to all the people that reached out to you, and let's get you some ads. Because that's the way he wants to do it, and he actually can do it now. I'm not saying you shouldn't go that route. I'm just saying if that is the lifeboat, we're kind of in trouble. That's like the grand slam. That's the Hail Mary in a football game. That's the overtime shootout goal. I mean, that is just really hard for most of us to get to. I'm not trying to say that as I don't believe in you being able to do it. I'm not saying that as I don't think that's reasonable. I'm just saying if we look at the numbers, if only 1% of people are ever going to get a sustainable amount of ads or sponsorships, 99% of us are going to fail, and I just don't want you to be in that 99%. I want you to be in the percentage of people that are actually able to monetize. And one of the best ways to do that is to do it in ways that other people aren't doing it necessarily, or doing it off the beaten path. If the beaten path, there's a reason the path is beaten, because it's used so much, which means it's common, which means the barrier to entry is much higher. Coaching is off the beaten path. Products and services are more off the beaten path. I think that's the way to do it. I think that's the best way to do it. So you've heard me say that a million times, but I just wanted to unpack maybe a little bit of a deeper layer to why. Just because most people, it took this client 400 or 500 episodes to get to a place where they're at 30,000 listens per month. That's 3 years, 4 years, 5 years of work. Can you do this for 3 years, 4 years, or 5 years of work without making money? That's up to you. That's up to you. I started coaching for free, as I think I've probably mentioned this before, but I started coaching for free. Our podcast was about self-improvement. I'm going to coach on self-improvement. Built a really good connection with certain audience members, had conversations with them behind the scenes, just add value, cool. They become community members, awesome. Reach out to them and say, hey, I'm interested in coaching. I've never done it. What do you think of 2 months of coaching, totally free? Everybody said yes. So I went from having zero prospect of money to having 5 people who I was going to work with on a coaching basis, and we're going to see what happens. Okay. That's a big win, though. That's a big up. Coached them all for free for 2 months, 8 weeks. At the end of it, said, I'd like to continue coaching you. Now I feel like I do have enough of a proof of concept. What do you think of $50 a week? And everybody said yes. At this point, we did not have nearly enough listens to monetize. That was year 2, probably like at the end of year 2. I think we had I think we either had 27,000 or 47,000 listens in our second year. So let's run the math. We're getting 4,000 listens per month-ish, if it's at the 47,000 mark. So that means somebody might have paid us a couple $100 a month, where now I'm coaching for $50 an hour. Well, if I go get 10 clients, I can make $500 a week. If I want to do weekly calls, I can make $2,000 a month doing this and not having to run ads on the podcast and being able to get to know the audience at a deeper level, and then having stories for the podcast when I do my episodes, and then having people that actually want to join the Facebook group, and then boom, 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 boom. Then people are leaving reviews and boom, boom, boom. That just seemed like a better model. Now, is it harder? Yeah. But I think it's also way more sustainable in terms of revenue driving. So again, I'll get off the soapbox because I know you've heard me say that so much, but I just want to give more layers underneath why, because I think it just seems super sexy to do the ad sponsorship route, but it seems sexy because it's sold as the sexy way, and it doesn't work for everybody, and it doesn't work for most people, and I just don't want you to fall into that trap. All right, cool. Anything else I would add here? Look, Don't ask how to pronounce your guest's last name on the interview. Don't do it. It is such a bad look. It is such a bad look. If you know how to pronounce it and then you mispronounce it, that's one thing. I'm all for that. You can mispronounce my name all you want. I'm all for it. But there's just something about when you're on a podcast and they say, all right, today we're talking with Kevin. How do I pronounce your last name? That is just not a good look. If you went to a job interview, you would know how to pronounce the company's name. You just would. When you go and meet your partner's parents, you know their names. Right? I just don't think it's a good look. And is your audience going to care? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, there's a lot of high quality podcasts out there. They want to listen to one that is worth their time, and they want to make sure that they're tuning into something that they're going to get value from. It's an easy thing to get. I mean, that's an easy thing to get, especially if the person has a podcast. So we got to pronounce their names right. At least you got to know how to pronounce it. I've mispronounced guests' names because I was nervous, for sure. And I never wanted to do pre-recorded intros or outros. If I was going to introduce a guest, I wanted to do it right in front of them. That was always my goal. Sometimes you're going to take an L on that. And that is what it is. But I never didn't know their last name, because you ask that in the pre-call. You ask that before you go on camera, whatever it is. And then last thing, this is something I've seen more common recently. If you're hosting guests, make sure you tell them when you're hitting the recording. I did an episode recently where when I got in the room, the recording was already running, which is normal. And I never knew when the episode started. I have no idea when we went from pre-chat to actual interview. No idea. And then at the end, there was no post-type conversation. He just canceled it, and it was the end. So just be careful with that, because you don't know. I don't know. Is the guest going to say something? Yes, of course. Some guests are going to say stuff in the preamble that they don't want on the actual interview. So that potentially creates a headache for you later on when you have to edit stuff out. Just something to be aware of. As the host, it's our job to build certainty. And building certainty often means we are setting the stage. So, hey, welcome. I know we're recording. No worries. None of this is going to be live. I just forget sometimes to hit record, so I want to make sure we're recording. I just want to make sure. How do I pronounce your last name? Cool. Awesome. Let me write that down. Cool. Is there anything off limits? Is there anything you don't want to talk about? Boom, boom, boom. Do you have enough time? Your Wi-Fi connection seems good. Your lighting's good. You're using the right mic. All right, cool. All right, any questions before we get going? Boom. Then you're off to the races. Now, if you have a pre-call, most of that is going to be taken care of. But this show didn't have a pre-call, and it was just you show up and you're already recording. Again, it doesn't bother me because I essentially assume everything is public. I'm just at the stage where I think to myself, if I'm talking to somebody behind the scenes, I'm going to assume this is going to be in front of the scenes. But most guests aren't going to be thinking that. They're going to be looking for a flow most likely. So that's the lessons. The latest lessons I've learned, I know they're all over the place. Somehow this is longer than normal. But those are probably the most valuable latest lessons I have learned, I would say. Yeah. I'll leave us all with that. All right. If you are looking for some lessons for yourself, maybe ones that I didn't talk about here, maybe I left off, or maybe they're ones that I just wouldn't completely air out publicly, I'll have my link in the show notes for a free 30-minute podcast breakthrough session. And then, as always, we have a private Facebook group. It's called Podcast Growth Nation, and there are posts in there every day about podcasting. A good way to keep it top of mind, a good way to surround yourself with other podcasters, and maybe learn a thing depending on what gets posted that day. So yeah, if you're trying to identify more as a podcaster, a great place to start is joining a Facebook group, because then you're going to just see a bunch of podcast content. So that is another link in the show notes below. I hope that you are learning your own lessons. While these are my lessons from working with a bunch of podcasters, I hope you're learning your own lessons as a podcaster that then you can deliver to your audience, or maybe they're not for your audience. But I hope your podcast is teaching you as much as it's teaching your audience. It just might be in a different way. I always hope that for you. All right, cool. Until next week, keep on crushing it, keep on podcasting, and I will talk to you all then.